Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Sandeep Brahmaruthu. I am a senior go-to-market specialist on the database and analytics team at AWS. I'm super excited that you guys are here today. We're going to spend some time talking about beyond AWS DMS. Talk about some programs and partners to help you ace your migration. So let's dive right in. So we've got an action-packed agenda in terms of some of the key topics that we want to cover today. So just looking at the slides, the first stuff we wanted to do is really kind of talk about what are some specific database migration options you have available to you as you look to migrate database workloads from on-premise to the AWS cloud. Then we'll dive into some of the common migration challenges that we see our customers go through when they're looking and when moving these workloads to AWS. Then we'll talk about how are we going to address those challenges, right? Like what are some specific programs and solutions that AWS has to offer to help you overcome some of these challenges so that you're successful in your migration journey with your database workloads. Specifically, we'll hit on 3 key programs. The first program we'll talk about is the Database Freedom Program. We'll talk about what it is and also how can you benefit from the Database Freedom Program to achieve that migration goals that you're looking for. Second, we'll talk about the Migration Acceleration Program, also known as MAP. The Migration Acceleration Program is a mass migration program, and we'll talk about what's that proven methodology that we've seen be successful for other customers that you could benefit from a tooling perspective as well as incentives. The last thing we'll talk about from a program standpoint is the Database Migration Accelerator, also known as DMA. We've launched this program earlier this year. Some really cool features that also helps our customers with the actual conversion of the database and the schema from a source database to a target database. So super excited to be talking about these programs, and we'll wrap it up with some key and important resources that are also available to you in your journey to AWS Cloud. So with that said, let's dive right in. So this particular slide kind of talks about, what are some common migration options our customers have from a database perspective as they're moving their database workloads from on-premise to the cloud. A lot of our customers' desired goal when they're looking to migrate database workloads from on-prem to the cloud is really want to adopt and embrace cloud-native database architectures, right? That they want to modernize their data architecture and they want to leverage some of the newer innovations that are developed as part of the cloud-native database platforms, for example, like Aurora, like DynamoDB, and others that the database platform offers, like Redshift. However, some customers realize that to achieve that modern state, sometimes they may have to take a multi-step approach to get into that end state, if you will. So we've got a variety of different options for our customers to take, depending on things like how fast do they need to get off of their on-premise environment to the cloud. Are they using commercial third-party applications? Is the migration so complex that they rather just move to the cloud first and then optimize it to a future state architecture that's more modern in nature? So there's a variety of different factors sort of come into play. But if you were to kind of look at it at a high level, right, these 3 are the most common paths that our customers take. So I already talked about this modern state, which is a state that where customers are moving off of legacy database platforms and moving to the modern platforms, right? They're breaking free. They're getting advantages associated with reducing the license costs and burdens associated with legacy platforms. They're enjoying the open source benefits. So Aurora especially is compatible with both MySQL as well as Aurora Postgres, right? Great options for our customers to think about and consider open source alternatives to commercial database platforms. And we talked about the different types of engines you've got available. AWS has a variety of different database engines that you may have heard through other sessions at reInvent that for you to leverage from, all the way from the relational side with Aurora, on the analytics side with Redshift, but also on the NoSQL side, right? DynamoDB, Neptune, TimeStream, variety of different options, picking the right tool for the right job depending on the use case and the data access pattern. For some of the other options that our customers have is more, I would say, in tune more towards getting quickly to the cloud if timing is of essence, or if there's a dependency from a third-party application vendor. Our customers also have a choice to just lift and shift their workloads, right? You're managing your database a certain way on-premise today, but you want to rehost that on an EC2 environment, effectively running the same database in the same exact fashion, but you're able to leverage some of the infrastructure benefits associated with the AWS cloud. You're not getting away from the vendor lock-in aspects of some of the commercial database vendors, but for some use cases, you have to deploy these particular database platforms, and rehosting is one of the options our customers do consider. The other option, also very quick in terms of moving from on-prem to the cloud, is what we call as move to managed, also replatforming. What that really means is that our customers are still staying on the same database platform. For example, if you're running Oracle on-prem, move it to a managed database platform like RDS Oracle. If you're running SQL on-prem, moving it to a managed database platform on our AWS called RDS SQL Server. If you're running MySQL or Postgres on-premise, but you don't want to do some of the undifferentiated heavy lifting of managing the databases yourselves, right? Like auto provision, benefiting from things like auto provisioning, backups, recovery, patching, things of that nature. RDS open source engines. So we have a lot of different platforms that are where you don't have to change the engine, but you just want to get the ability to not having to worry about these mundane tasks and benefit the value that AWS provides by the managed services. The move to managed is a great option for you to consider. So as you could see, you have options that are flexible options. What we generally see with customers is that sometimes if speed and velocity is important, right, they consider move to managed or lifting and shifting. If you truly are looking to modernize and break free and cut costs from a licensing perspective, right, really looking at our cloud native options, open source alternatives that our customers are able to benefit from. So options for you to think about, and again, right, we see customers kind of going through this and picking the right option for the right workload and then the application work. So with that said, let's dive into some common challenges that we see from our customers as it relates to migrations. So for example, there are a few things that I want to highlight here. The first is having a compelling business driver or business case for migration, right? A lot of customers want to just move certain workloads and want to try out certain things. But it's important with database migrations in general, you've got the right level of sponsorship, not only from the database teams, but also from the application owners and the business owners, right? Because when you're moving a database, not only are you impacting the database teams, but also the business teams and the workflows that are connected to these platforms. So it's super important to have the right level of sponsorship so that everybody's aligned and are successful towards those migrations. And the second thing is the technical complexity. Technical complexity is really around how much of the database that you currently are running on-prem, right? Like how much of the proprietary features are you leveraging? How much of the PL SQL that you have as an example, right, in these databases are you trying to migrate? If you have a ton of stuff that you've customized and been relying on these proprietary features for the last 5, 10, 15 years, right, that comes into play because, those, if you have, for example, millions of lines of PL SQL code, right, that's, some of that we can automate. In fact, a lot of it we can automate with some of our migration tools. But there's some of the manual intervention that still needs to take place, right? So that's thinking through some of that complexity is super important so you can better plan and come up from a migration perspective. Level of effort is something that is super important. There's going to be some databases that our customers are easy to migrate where there's not a lot of proprietary features. The connection between the application and the database tends to be kind of a standard over a JDBC or ODBC wire, right? That tends to be more on the easier database to migrate. But if you have a database that's using, again, a ton of proprietary features, lots of code, dependencies between in-house developed applications, third-party developed applications, that level of effort may increase. So something to think about. We've seen that being something that our customers have to plan for as they embark on this migration journey. Data volume, data variety, velocity, again, is super important. Like, what are some of the specific features that you may be using on a commercial database today on-prem, right? And around RTO, RPO, and how does that translate to the right sort of the features, as well as the velocity, the size, and the different types, data types, if you will, that you need to ensure are still supported. So making sure that compatibility and things of that nature exist is super important and something that you want to plan for as well. The last thing I kind of touched on is the fact that, especially if you're moving third-party applications, ISV applications, it's super important that those ISVs have support for running these workloads in the cloud and also running and supporting some of the cloud native database options or our managed database platforms option, right? So that if you ever need any kind of support down the road, you've got that basis covered, both from a database angle perspective as well as from an ISV standpoint. So these are some common challenges. Absolutely, you can overcome these things, but you got to make sure that you understand what these are and kind of work and come up with a plan to address them. So now that we talked on some of the common migration options as well as some of the challenges, let's dive into some of the programs that we have available for your consideration as you embark on your migration journey. The first one we'll talk about is the Database Freedom Program. So what is the Database Freedom Program? So the Database Freedom Program is a program that it's an AWS program, and it's really focused on helping our customers accelerate database migration and modernization off of commercial database platforms like Oracle, like SQL Server as an example, to AWS cloud native databases and analytics platforms, right? So moving workload from these commercial engines to things like Aurora, like Redshift, like DynamoDB, the AWS native platforms. And so as we just touched on, there's a variety of motions that go into migrating a database or modernizing a database architecture. And the program is really sort of indexed on a couple key pillars. The first thing that the program sort of offers to our customers is innovation around tooling and database platforms. Part of the innovation and that we're providing to our customers is providing variety of different database types for them to consider. Historically, what one may have shoved a variety of different data models into a single or similar relational data type, right? As you think about modernizing and moving to the cloud, it's a great opportunity for you to think about, hey, what parts of my monolithic database and application architecture should continue to stay on the relational side? What aspects of my workload should I really think about putting that into some sort of NoSQL engine that the DynamoDB key spaces, or if it's graph oriented or on Neptune, right? Or if it's more analytic oriented, thinking about something like Redshift, right? So we provide that innovation and these options for you to consider so that you can achieve that freedom off of the legacy platforms onto these purpose-built database engines. Another big part of innovation is around tooling, migration tooling specifically. So how can we help you automate as much of this migration as possible, right? For example, how do we reduce the risk of migrating data that resides in Oracle as an example and moving it to Aurora, right? Or from SQL Server, moving it to Redshift. These are some of the examples that are use cases that are built into some of our migration tooling. Specifically, there are two tools that I'll talk about more in detail in a later slide. One is the Database Migration Service, the other one being the Schema Conversion tool. The Database Freedom Program is behind these two tools in helping iterating, updating, and making sure our customers are able to use these tools in their migration process, all the way from assessment to actual schema conversion, data movement to these target platforms on AWS. The third thing from a tooling perspective is really, an innovation perspective is really, we want to empower as many users as possible into making data-driven decisions by way of these purpose-built database engines, as well as the migration tools that I talked about. The other aspect of the program is really around providing the expertise, right? We've done this migrations, both homogeneous as well as heterogeneous migrations for other customers. So we're able to share our best practices with our customers so that you're not repeating some of the similar mistakes some others have gone through, especially if it's a very similar migration pattern, right? So we want to help shorten those migration patterns as much as possible so that you're able to realize the value of the cloud as quickly as you can. So to that effort, we've got a variety of different resources available to you. I'll touch about some of the resources from a partner's perspective, the partners who demonstrated this type of database migration work. Our professional services organization has core competency in database migrations, as well as other tools and assets like migration playbooks, free to download from our website, very detailed technical assets to really kind of help you think about, okay, if I'm using this feature on-prem with this legacy platform, right? How does that translate to something like Aurora, right? What are some workarounds? What are some compatibility issues I need to think about so that, again, you prepare upfront rather than having to find out the hard way if you've actually gone ahead with the migration and came across this as a potential issue downstream. So a big part of the program is to really package up a lot of the best practices and offer that up to our customers in a variety of different ways that I just highlighted. The last thing from a program perspective I want to highlight here is really around incentives, right? We realize with migration programs in general, especially with database migrations, there's work involved. There's work involved in, especially with that one-time upfront migration effort that's needed to move in a workload from a source database to a new modern database target. So we do have some incentive programs to help reduce some of those migration costs to help you with the business case to do and move forward with these projects. We can get into more specifics on a one-on-one basis, obviously, so that we can get into more, so that we understand really your environment so that we can help provide you with more specifics around the types of incentives that you may be eligible for. So in a nutshell, this program has been around, like I said, we've launched it about a couple years ago. Great program, a lot of customers love it. It's a very structured program with structured engagement and prescriptive guidance to our customers to really walk them through every step of the way in their migration journey off of these commercial platforms and achieving that freedom. So let me double click on some of the slides or some of the services, I should say, and tools that we have available from a migration perspective around databases. The first one that I want to touch on really is the Database Migration Service. It's a database migration and a replication managed service that we offer to our customers. So a lot of customers use DMS to migrate a variety of different databases from on-prem to the cloud, right? If you go to the AWS website, there's lots of details on the variety of different source databases it supports, as well as a variety of different target databases it supports, right? By version numbers, if you will. Very popular choice for our customers. It's a very low-cost option for you to consider. Since we've launched the service, over 300,000 databases have been migrated as a result of using DMS. So highly encourage you to take a look at it as one of the ways to move these workloads from on-prem to the cloud. The schema conversion tool is another important tool that I want to highlight. It comes in super helpful in a couple of different use cases. The first use case schema conversion tool is really useful is even before you convert any schema or even before you do any kind of code migration or data migration, the schema conversion tool has an assessment option. So you can actually point that tool to a source database like an Oracle or SQL Server, right? Run the schema conversion tool in assessment mode, and the tool actually spits out an assessment report. What's the level of technical complexity in assessing the schema and the data structures that's involved in this particular database that you pointed to? Super valuable, super important, because even before you do the migration itself, you have a better sense as to like, okay, how much of the data objects that I have in my current on-prem database, right, can that be auto-converted using the schema conversion tool as an example, right? If the number is very high, and we see this very common, and that number continues to go higher and higher, upwards of 80, 90% in some instances, right? That means that we're automating a lot of that for you, right? So there's very, very minimal that you have to do in terms of manual conversion. In some cases, if you have a lot of proprietary features, what have you, that percentage of auto conversion may be lower, right? So knowing that upfront was super helpful, so that you can better plan which databases to tackle first versus some of the more difficult ones later, or vice versa, depending on your migration goals, right? So schema conversion tool in the assessment mode is super important in your assessment phase of the journey. Obviously, once you're past that, when you're actually doing the conversion from one data type, a database, to the other, right? The schema conversion tool will actually do the conversion of the schema itself. So super helpful, and it's a tool that a lot of our customers use, and it's a free tool as well to go download and use from the AWS website. So in addition to some of our native tooling that AWS has to provide, especially when you're doing like for like, if you're not changing the engine, if you're on MySQL on-prem, you move to Aurora MySQL or RDS MySQL, or if you're on Oracle and you move to RDS Oracle, you also have options to use some of the native tooling as well, right? It's not a requirement that you have to use AWS migration tooling in your projects. There are also a variety of other open source options like Order2PG as an example, as well as commercial tools like like Golden Gate, Attunity, Talent, HVR, and others for you to consider as part of your migration projects. The last thing I want to cover on the Database Freedom program is really the Database Freedom Workshop. So one of the things as part of the program that we offer is a very structured engagement model that customers that qualify for the Database Freedom program. And the ones who qualify, we typically, pre-COVID, this would be like a 2-day on-site engagement that AWS would invest in the customer success. And now we've kind of slightly, changed that format to be more virtual friendly, if you will. But the whole goal of this Database Freedom Workshop is to work with our customers to really identify the scope and the timelines associated with these database migration initiatives, right? Getting the right alignment within the organization, and really address questions that our customers have, like where do I start, or how do I start, right? What tool do I use? How do I select what databases are the right databases to migrate? How do I prioritize, right? How do I come up with the right wave plan? And how do I get educated on some of these tools and engines? You may be very new to Aurora, or you've never used DMS or SCT. So how do you get started, right? So the Database Freedom Workshop really is intended to help customers to get their database migration journey started, do the right level of assessment upfront, get the right level of foundational understanding of the tools and engines, so that you're set up for success, right? So that's really the goal of the workshops. And some of the key activities that we do in these workshops, typically we look at roughly about 5, give or take, in some cases, more databases and workloads, right? We dive deep with you. We work with our customers, databases, and application team owners to really understand how does the current state architecture look like for these workloads, right? And what are some of the specific requirements that you have? What features are you using on-prem with these legacy platforms, right? All of that is super important. So the AWS experts that are helping you, technical experts that are helping you in this workshop, have a good idea and sense for your requirements so that we can make suggestions for you on future state options for you from a database perspective on AWS, right? Help you size those workloads. Rationalize which ones should go to refactor to versus, maybe if there's some applications workflow that are tied to a COTS application, what are your options? Should you modernize those to a modern database? Should you, use move to manage with an RDS or managed database offering on this existing commercial engine? Or should you just deploy them on EC2? So rationalizing which R factor to apply is something that we would do on these workloads that we would analyze. And really kind of provide you with that high-level timeline, give you guidance on level of effort involved, and also, like I said, sizing and cost estimates for these workloads that we analyze. And typically the scope is roughly about 5 workloads, give or take, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the customer's needs and requirements. And the outcome of these workshops, in these 2-day workshops, is, again, we want to drive alignment with the organization on the database teams and the application owners, right? And we want to move forward to actually doing this migration, taking it to pilot, or actually taking it into production, right? And putting, getting the right partners or our pro-serve teams engaged, so that we now have a clear plan in terms of what the next steps are as part of the migration journey. It's a great option. It's a complimentary offer for the right customers. So I encourage you to reach out to your AWS teams to learn more about the workshop and how you can get started with your database freedom journey. I talked a little bit about some of the partners. So let me touch on some of the database migration partners. So these are partners that, not exhaustive list, but some of the partners that we have worked with that have demonstrated database migration capability. So happy to introduce you to some of these partners. They're very important, helping you all the way from the assessment phase to POC pilot phases, as well as taking you into production, right? So these are some partners, but there are more depending on your geography and what part of the world you're based out of. Here are some customer examples of customers that have gone through the database journey. So we'll talk about Verizon real quick. Verizon is a customer that I've spoken actually at a few reInvents now about their database migration journey, migrating over 1,000 different business critical applications and database backend systems that are tied to these apps, and moving into AWS, right? Across the spectrum of database options we talked about. A lot of them moved to a modern state like Aurora or Redshift, others that have moved to RDS commercial engines, right? Depending on that assessment that we talked about, figuring out which workload needs to go where. So great example of a large customer doing this at a very large scale within their environment. Amazon.com is another great example. We have a ton of great assets about what we have done ourselves to help get off of Oracle and migrate to purpose-built database engines like Aurora, DynamoDB, Redshift, data lakes, what have you, right? And by doing that, not only were we able to save costs, but also be able to reduce latency. Remember one of the things that I talked about it's not just about cost saving, but it's also the benefits that you get by picking the right data structure, database on the cloud for the right data model. So you're getting the best performance possible from a use case perspective, from your application workload standpoint. And that's a great example with Amazon.com, where we actually took the Oracle database, we fanned that out to a variety of different database engines, which made sense for those use cases. And there's a bunch of other examples here. Another great one is Intuit. They've migrated their data warehousey type of workload off of SQL Server onto Amazon Redshift. And by doing that, they were able to reduce the time it took for them to process data, right? And that in turn enable their business users to make quicker decisions. So these are some examples. There's a lot more of these examples on the AWS side. Case studies, I highly encourage you to take a look at. Each one of these journeys are somewhat unique, right? But there's a lot of commonality and best practices that you can gain from, so that you don't fall into some of the challenges some of these customers have faced in the early parts of their database migration journey. So, ton of great content. Highly encourage you to double click on each one of these examples. I just touched on a couple today, but there's a lot more that you can gain from there. So let me quickly switch gears in the interest of time. I want to talk about another program that's also very, very important as part of migrations. That's called the Migration Acceleration Program, also known as MAP. So MAP has been around within AWS for some time now. We have many customers, hundreds, if not even in thousands of customers that have gone through large-scale migrations. And we have a very proven methodology in terms of how MAP is what MAP brings to the table for our customers, right? It's got a very proven methodology in terms of figuring out and using the right levels of tools in the process across assessment phase, around the planning, the mobilize phase, as well as migration and modernization phases. We've got the right partner tools, some of which that we just talked about from an AWS perspective, but also partner tools that can help you with the migrations themselves, investment vehicles, as well as training. So MAP is a great program, especially for large-scale migration. So I would highly encourage you to think about the MAP program. It applies not only for databases and analytics, but also for your broader AWS migration needs. I will touch a little bit more specifically on what the MAP journey looks like from a database and analytics perspective today. When you think about the MAP journey, it's sort of a three-phased migration journey. The first phase is the assess phase. So typically, this is where we're trying to understand how many databases do you have, right? Like, what's the level of complexity in these databases? How many of those databases are tied to homegrown applications versus commercial applications? Doing a quick level of directional discovery, and also providing you some sort of a TCO report on, hey, what are some projected cost savings I'm going to realize by migrating, let's say, these 500 databases that I have on-prem, running commercial databases, to AWS purpose-built database engines. Knowing that is super important for our customers, because you can then take the right action, the right priority with your business owners internally to figure out, like, okay, let's accelerate these forward, right? Let's put a plan in place to move forward beyond the assessment phase. And this phase is also where a lot of our customers are just getting started. So a lot of enablement around getting more smart about some of our tooling and migration engines. And the database freedom workshop that I talked about would actually fit right into this assess phase. Mobilize is where we do that detailed planning and discovery, really understand the dependencies and impacts between application layer, database layers, right? Setting up the right landing zones, coming up with a more detailed business case and more detailed wave plans, especially when you have hundreds or if not thousands of workloads, right? Which set of databases and application am I going to migrate in the initial wave, right? Versus the next wave, and kind of playing that out over the spectrum. So a lot of important activities typically happen in the mobilize phase. And this is also where customers, if they choose to, may go through a pilot phase as well to kind of really experience the whole migration process with the tools and with the training and everything else. And migrate and modernize phase is really built for scale, right? Once you migrate and modernize, you're doing that in a repeatable fashion, and so that you're able to achieve your ultimate objective of completing the migration to the cloud as quickly as you can. So this is a proven methodology that MAP has done, and this, we're kind of bucketing a lot of different activities in these three phases that you could see. Sometimes there may be some overlap, but at a high level, this is a really good sort of way of thinking about what do I need to do to start with, right? And what are some of the steps along the way that I need to think about or plan for in a migration journey? So the last thing I want to talk about today is Amazon DMA, also known as the Database Migration Accelerator. This is a program we actually launched earlier this year. And the reason why we launched this program is a lot of our customers have talked about, like, hey, I want to move off of on-prem to the cloud. I want to move off of commercial database engines and embrace and use a lot of the AWS native database and analytics platforms. But there's some work involved, especially in converting what was running on these legacy platforms to running on these modern platforms, especially the conversion of the data from one database to the other, right? Converting the schema, things of that nature. So the DMA program for qualified workloads, and today we're starting off with supporting Oracle and SQL Server that have Java and .NET application frameworks, right? The Database Migration Accelerator has conversion experts. These are AWS engineers and experts that would actually use our tools, the DMS tool, the schema conversion tool, do that conversion on behalf of the customer, right? And provide that back to the customer, right? So in effect, we're helping our customers refactor their databases and applications to the AWS platform, and that could be running on Aurora Postgres or MySQL as a starting point today. So that's what DMA really is. We're providing that conversion, database conversion service to our customers, leveraging our tools to at a fixed cost and price, so that we're doing the sort of in a predictable, low risk manner for a customer standpoint. So what's generally involved in migrating an application? There's a lot of different components to this. As a lot of you already know, it's analyzing the application. It's a schema migration. It's application migration, data migration, quality assurance, right? UAT testing, production cutover. The purpose of me putting up this slide is to kind of highlight what are some of the things that a DMA really focuses on, right? Which is the stuff that's highlighted here in blue, right? And what are some of the things that customers who know the workloads and the applications, right? The validation aspects of it much better than anybody else, right? That our customers or their preferred partners would come in and help, or our AWS professional services for that matter, to address. So again, just to kind of summarize, right? The Database Freedom Program, really to get you started. The workshops are super important. The MAP program is really great. Again, I've got a proven methodology. The incentives, the tooling are super helpful for our customers to help reduce that migration costs. And then DMA is a program that really helps you with the actual conversion itself. So super important for you to think about. So I'll just kind of quickly go through what that process looks like. It starts with, again, figuring out the right level of assessment and qualification. Like today, we're focusing a lot on Oracle and SQL Server, .NET, Java frameworks. We providing that refactoring service to you and delivering that refactored application and database for you to deploy in a non-production environment. For this additional sort of in doing that UAT testing that I talked about, as well as cutting it over to production, this is where we leverage our professional services and our partners to kind of get you or our customers doing it themselves. So let's talk about available resources. So we talked about a lot of these different programs. So I highly encourage you to click on these links on migrations, Database Freedom Program, the MAP program, the DMA. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot more details. So I encourage you to click on these links at your leisure to learn more about it and how to reach out to us. So with that said, thank you very much for joining me today. I know there was a lot we covered. I do want to leave you with a couple other related sessions that you may want to consider attending as part of this virtual reInvent. DAT 205, Enterprise Database Transitions, License-Free Cloud Databases, very related to the topic that I talked about today, goes into a little bit more on the technology side. Highly encourage you to attend that. If you want to dive deep into some of the tools, the schema conversion tool and DMS, which I would say is very foundational to any database migration efforts to moving to the AWS cloud, highly encourage you to go attend DAT 312. And the last one is DAT 213, which is the break free from legacy databases. With that, I just want to summarize. Please start your database journey, freedom journey today. Start with the assessment and discovery. Leverage the expertise and the resources that I talked about, and select the right partner for you that can stay along with you towards the entirety of your database migration journey. So with that said, I really want to thank you for taking the time, and I'm super excited that you guys are now embarking on your database freedom journey. Thank you very much.